The current Middle East conflict is an absolute nightmare for F1 logistics. But back in 2011, a different crisis actually brought the entire calendar to a screeching halt. Most people don't realize how close the sport came to a total meltdown. And the brutal lesson that they learned from it completely changed the way F1 handles situations like this today. When the Arab Spring protests swept through the region right before the season just started in 2011, it was a disaster. But the biggest problem wasn't the street, it was that F1 bosses just froze. They hesitated for months, hoping that things would eventually get better. But then eventually the teams had to step in and force the FIA to cancel the race. That hesitation cost them millions. And F1 decided right there and then, never again. The new rule became incredibly simple. Protect the money and the show must go on. That's exactly why we saw them race in Saudi Arabia a couple of years ago, even when a missile struck an oil facility just a few miles away from the track. F1 learned how to put on a blindfold, ignore the chaos, and just keep rolling. Which brings us to the crisis right now. Recent military strikes have triggered massive airspace closures across the Middle East. Transit hubs in Dubai, Doha, and Abu Dhabi are basically shut down. Thousands of F1 personnel were stranded just days before the 2026 season opener. So, is the Australian Grand Prix happening this weekend? Yes, F1 got a little bit lucky. And they also got aggressive. The cars and heavy freight were shipped out of pre-season testing even before the skies closed. They are sitting right now in Melbourne. And for the personnel, F1 is chartering massive flights to bypass Middle East entirely so that the grid is completely ready. But here's where it gets tense. The 4th and 5th races of the season are in Bahrain and Saudi in the next month. What happens to them? If we have learned anything from 2011, it is that F1 will not hesitate this time. They will try every single workaround known to them to keep those races alive, and they won't cancel over bad PR either. But there is a massive catch. In 2011, F1 learned how to ignore politics. Today, they are facing a physical wall. Just last week, a missile landed barely 20 kilometers away from the Bahrain track. You can spin a story to ignore the protests, but you cannot talk your way out of a closed sky. If cargo planes cannot fly safely through the region, all the money in the world would not put the cars back on the grid. So if you learn something new, drop me a follow.